People often have strange and bizarre stories from their workplace. It seems like no matter where you are or what you do, something odd is bound to happen. Up until I recently started my new job, did I begin to experience these events for myself. I was in that sort of limbo between high school and college. I had been searching for some employment to accrue some extra disposable income. Despite my best efforts, not many places were hiring, and if they were, the requirements they listed were far beyond my current standings. I mean, why do I need a bachelor's degree to input some data in a computer? With the list of jobs being extremely limited, I had no choice but to set my standards much, much lower. As a result, I ended up getting hired on at this fast food burger joint on the edge of town. It was one of those family businesses trying to claw and compete with powerhouses in the industry. I heard in passing that one of the owners had a poor experience at one of the mainstream locations and was petty enough to start their own business. I began working the night shift a little over a year and a half ago. The job wasn't too difficult, especially for the first couple of months. I mostly just cleaned the entire dining area, as well as restock anything that needed restocking. It wasn't until a few weeks after that I was bumped up to the register position, namely, the drive-thru. And yes, we were open 24 hours a day. During the early evenings, we'd have a steady stream of customers stopping by, but things usually died down around 1 o'clock in the morning. After that point, all bets are off on what you might encounter. You get any number of things, ranging from drunks to homeless, to travelers passing through town, off to destinations unknown. However, none of those occurrences could be classified as strange. Well, not strange in the common sense. The very first strange thing I encountered while working there happened around 6 months after I started. I remember throwing my bag in the back and taking up my position near the drive-thru window. It was a Monday night, so it was already one of our slower evenings. The hours ticked by, and I was passing the time by either scrolling social media or mindlessly attempting to stack straws, when something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention. I turned and glanced through that small window out into the void of night. Someone was walking by on the other side of the lot. I should mention that on the other side of the lane for cars is a short grassy area that extends about 5 or 6 feet before butting up to a mess of trees that line a nearby creek. They were walking along that grassy area near the trees. It was a clown. Well, a man dressed up in full clown attire anyway. He had large baggy red and white overalls, stark white face paint, with bright red hair crowning the top of his head. He was dragging behind him what looked to be a luggage case. He stopped briefly as he passed directly in front of the window's view. He turned his head in my direction and gave me a faint wave before turning and continuing on walking, disappearing down into the darkness. I called my other coworkers over to make sure I wasn't crazy, but the clown was long gone by the time they walked over to the window. They all joked at my expense before returning to their tasks. Another incident that comes to mind happened only around 4 months ago. It was nearing 3 o'clock in the morning. I had been scrolling through Facebook when once again, something flickered out of the corner of my eye. I turned, looking through the window. I didn't see any person this time. Instead, I spotted a strange light bouncing behind the dark trees that line the area. The light looked like a floating orb, just bobbing and weaving between the tree branches. It grew brighter and dimmer in some areas, and I can't explain why, but for some reason it didn't seem like a flashlight to me. Then it did something even more bizarre. The light hovered near the tree line, right up to the edge of that grassy area. It seemed to float in midair, before shooting up nearly 12 feet off the ground. Then, it began to silently retreat back into the woods, vanishing without a trace. 2 more events happened between that point and today. One, which made me question reality, and another, which made me switch off the night shift entirely. The first happened merely 2 weeks after that strange light show I had encountered. This specific occurrence happened rather late in the early morning. It was around roughly 4 or maybe 5 o'clock. The twilight of dawn was fast approaching, filling the sky with soft blues and purples, while the landscape still retained its muted colors. My manager asked me to take the trash out before the morning shift arrived, and I begrudgingly rose from my chair and sauntered over to the bins. Upon grabbing all the trash, I made my way to the back door of the building and stepped outside. The crunch of gravel under my feet echoed around me as I walked across the lot to the dumpsters. I tossed in bag after bag before shutting the lid. I turned to make my way back towards the door when a noise caught my attention. It sounded like numerous twigs snapping and leaves rustling. I looked in the direction of the noise and noticed the tops of the trees were moving. Not in a gust of wind sort of way, like something large and heavy was crashing into them. The treetops would bend and jostle abruptly before returning back to position. It almost looked as if something was pushing the trees aside, and despite the trees moving, I heard no other sound aside from the subsequent leaves and twigs snapping. Surely something large enough to affect individual trees like that should make some sort of sound, right? The trees ebbed one after another, and I noticed the direction that it was moving. Whatever it was coming directly towards me. I took a few cautious steps back, still keeping my eye on the location. The tree behind the one directly in front of me jostled violently and stopped, and I had to catch myself from falling over. It was unsettling because I could see the tree behind the one in front of me partially. It seemed to just move all on its own. There was absolutely nothing between those 2 trees. I squinted my eyes to see if I missed something, but I couldn't see anything. I headed back inside confused and giving only a single more passing glance over my shoulder. The last event occurred about a week ago. I had been running late for work and arrived 30 minutes after I was supposed to clock in. I got an earful from my manager, but he eventually calmed down and resumed my spot near the window. Throughout the early part of the night, we had our usual customers rolling up. Eventually, though, those customers began to dwindle until they stopped arriving altogether. I was once again mindlessly staring at my phone, just waiting for the next customer to arrive, when the sensor on my headset went off, notifying me that a new customer had just pulled up. I tapped the receiver on my headset and gave them the standard greeting. A few seconds passed before I gave the greeting a second time. When I did, a static noise began to fill my earpiece. Through the broken static, I heard a very chilling voice ask me, My hands immediately dropped my phone on the counter as I stood up. I struggled to press the voice activation button on my headset, but somehow I did it. I wasn't sure what I was going to say in response to that, but all I could think to say was the same greeting a third time. The speaker just crackled endlessly, and it was at that moment that I felt a presence standing only a few feet away from me, just on the other side of that small glass window. I felt my pulse beginning to thin out as I resisted the urge to face the window. I knew something was on the other side just waiting there. I swallowed my nerves and turned my head to the left. It was there. I say it because it wasn't a person. It was just standing there plainly, with its hands pressed up against the glass. Long fingers that seemed to stretch the length of the entire drive-thru window. Its torso was a fleshy mass of bone and tendon. Even though I could see its ribs, its stomach was distended and grotesque. The head was bald, with skin that seemed to endlessly sag. It almost looked like an old man. However, the skin had completely grown over the eyes. Its teeth made a sickening chattering sound as it repeatedly chomped down on them. It then began to wedge its fingers into the drive-thru window, and I screamed, falling back, nearly knocking over my manager in the process. He yelled at me asking what the hell I was doing, and I just pointed back to the window. When he looked, the window was empty. He told me to get up off the floor and get back to work. I stood up, but I could still feel my hands and legs trembling. I tried to convince him that something was out there, and he just brushed me off. That's when I recalled our security system we had in place. We have a single camera at an angle that watches the drive-thru window. I begged him to let me see the playback, and with a heavy sigh, he agreed. I made my way back to the manager's office and sat at the desk. I opened up the surveillance program and began scrolling back the time. I went back to the moment I got the sensor alert and watched the monitor closely. My manager was staring over my shoulder. The camera became grainy, and for a few seconds, I saw a shadow moving towards the window on the ground. Just before it stepped into the light, the camera locked up and froze for a few minutes before resuming. After that, all I could see was a shadow on the ground, trailing off towards the woods. My manager concurred that I was just imagining things, and as a retort, I asked him to transfer me to the day shift. He returned a stifled scoff, but acquiesced nonetheless. I'm not sure why I didn't just outright quit the job. Maybe it was my desperate need for money. Maybe I just felt safer during the day. Or maybe I'm just waiting to see if someone else on the night shift ends up experiencing the same thing I did. Just so I know I'm not insane.